So on behalf of Bayview, I would like to thank the Worship Committee for giving us the opportunity to further our intercultural ministry through a presentation on the history of Bayview United. The United Church strongly believes in the importance of intercultural ministry. What I've learned in my time working with the Cummer members of the Exploration and Amalgamation teams, and in the nearly 4 months that we have been worshiping together, is that Cummer has already taken great steps in becoming an intercultural church. I've seen many examples of this, from Sherilyn's acknowledgement in worship that we are not all of the same mind or perspective, but we're thankful for the love that makes it possible for us to be together. To be invited to pray in the word and language of our choice. And in the work that was done to be officially recognized as an affirming church that strives to be fully inclusive of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And I'm sure there are many other examples. The amalgamation between Bayview and Cummer will mean that the new congregation will be a merging of two churches with unique intercultural identities. And today is an opportunity for Bayview to share its history and how that has defined the culture of Bayview. Now, for those that were able to join last week for the presentation and discussion on intercultural ministry, you were introduced to the concept of the cultural iceberg. The theory that culture is like an iceberg. 10% is visible above the water, while 90% is hidden beneath the surface of the water. As you saw in the slideshow during Theme Talk, while there are many congregations that amalgamated to form the present-day Bayview United, we're going to focus on the history of the Japanese Canadian congregations, as they have a unique history that is a large part of that 90% below the surface. Their experiences and of their families during the evacuation and internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. And how that led directly to the formation of the congregations.
Japanese Canadians had experienced the extremes of the War Measures Act, as newspapers were shut down, property was impounded, and a curfew. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese Canadians had experienced the extremes of the War Measures Act, as newspapers were shut down, property was impounded, and a curfew imposed. Japanese Canadians believed that calm would be restored, as they were, after all, Canadian citizens. They were unprepared for the events that followed. In January 1942, the federal government designated an area 160 kilometers inland from the BC coast as an exclusion zone and ordered the removal of Japanese Canadian males between the ages of 18 and 45. Within weeks, 1,300 men were sent to road camps in the BC interior. In February, the government ordered the removal of all Japanese Canadians. The removal started with men. Those who refused to leave their wives and children were sent to prisoner of war camps in Northern Ontario. Until internment camps could be built in the BC interior, 8,000 Japanese Canadians were removed from the coast and warehoused in former stables and barns at Hastings Park in Vancouver. Conditions were overcrowded and degrading.
So some members So some members of our congregation were in Hastings Park. So the following video is one person's experience of that.
We are standing in front of the barn in Hastings Park in Vancouver, British Columbia. And this is the barn into which 8,000 women and children were incarcerated. When we came here in April of 1942, we dragged our suitcases into this barn, and our nostrils were hit by this pungent smell of urine and feces. And just immediately we felt unclean and helpless, wondering why human beings were being asked to live in such condition. There was a rumor that was brought in from Vancouver saying that all Japanese nationals without citizenship were going to be taken away. So we were dreading that day. We didn't know when. But on March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, we saw an RCMP officer drive into our driveway and just literally manhandled my father, just dragged him away from our house and literally threw him onto the back of the pickup truck. And he fell and face planted on the back of the truck. But my father jumped up quickly just to reassure us that he was okay. And then as a 7-year-old child, I saw right in front of my eyes the gun in the holster of the RCMP officer. And so I thought for sure, this is what this RCMP officer was going to do, was to shoot my father, and we would never see him again.
So the following video is going to describe what happened after that initial rounding up of Japanese Canadians.
A small group with family connections outside of the exclusion zone were allowed to leave the coast on their own. A second group was permitted to relocate to self-supporting sites in BC, like the East Lillooet camp, where internees had to pay for their own living and relocation costs. A third group was sent to Alberta and Manitoba to work on sugar beet farms. Approximately 4,000 were sent to the prairies, where they endured harsh and primitive living conditions. Of all Japanese Canadians removed, the largest number, nearly 12,000, were interned in camps in the interior of BC. 3 of the camps were former ghost towns, Greenwood, Sandon, and Caslow, where housing consisted of abandoned buildings. The remaining camps were built from the ground up on large tracts of land. The largest, Tashmi, held over 2,500 people.
So the experiences of one of the internees at Caslow, Sue Kai, is recounted in this next video. Sue was one of the original and long-standing members of the Toronto Japanese United Church. Sue is asked about her time in Caslow from her perspective as a youth, including her time as a teacher in the camps.
So did you have to go to some training to be a teacher?
Yeah, and okay, the teachers, they wanted you to be a high school grad, so, but we didn't have training for a teacher, but the BC Security Commission, they had a little, we went away to a place called New Denver, and we went to school for about three weeks to learn to become a teacher. That was very interesting. I think the castle was the best place. At least we had flush toilets and we had a nice park. The children used to play baseball. So we had a good time compared to the other ghost time. They had a very hard, difficult time. But, and then the United States people, they were very good. And then the people who used to live, the Habitian people, they welcomed us, and the people were able to go to the Habitian High School.
Just a quick translation. Hakujin means white people in Japanese, just so you know. Foreigner, sorry. Foreigner. So as Sue mentions in her story, the United Church had a presence in the internment camps. Approximately 1/4 of Japanese Canadians at the beginning of World War II were United Church members and adherents. During the internment, the United Church played a special role in the lives of the internees, maintaining a presence and support for evacuees. Now, as Sue's comments suggest, the adults tried to shelter the children and provide as normal an existence as possible, even as they lived with the bitter realities of what was happening to them.
Back on the coast, businesses, homes, and personal effects of all Japanese Canadians were liquidated without their consent. Sold for a fraction of their value, the proceeds were used to pay for the cost of operating the camps. The elimination of the Japanese Canadian community that had lived on Powell Street for over 50 years was now complete. At the end of the war, the federal government gave internees the choice to move east of the Rockies or be deported to Japan. Those who chose to move east to Toronto and other cities encountered discrimination and difficulty finding employment.
So after arriving in the Toronto area, the community formed the Toronto Japanese United Church in 1946 under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Kosaburo Shimizu and his wife, Hide Hyodo Shimizu. Hide was a trailblazer in the Japanese Canadian community. As Sukai mentioned in her story, internees took responsibility to teach the children in the camps. Hide was the first person of Japanese Canadian descent in British Columbia to receive a teacher's certificate. Her many accomplishments are detailed in this following video.
In 1936, Hide was invited to Ottawa to be a part of a delegation seeking the right to vote for Japanese Canadians. The group appeared before a committee at the House of Commons, which was considering lifting the ban on the Asian vote. Hide and her fellow delegates gave strong presentations, but were unable to convince the committee to end the ban. In 1942, during the Second World War, more than 22,000 persons of Japanese origin in BC were uprooted and interned. At the beginning of internment, Japanese Canadians were sent to Hastings Park in Vancouver, where they were held for months. To ensure Nikkei children continued to receive an education, Hide took on a huge challenge. While still teaching at Lord Byng, Hide traveled to Hastings Park after school, taught several more classes, then hurried home before 9 p.m. curfew. Hide was eventually interned at New Denver in the BC interior, where she recruited and trained high school graduates to teach in the camps. Each month, Hide traveled to several camps, supervising the education of thousands of children. When the camps were closed in 1945, after the Second World War, Hide never returned to teach in Steveston. Because Japanese Canadians were not permitted to return to coastal BC until 1949, Hide had moved to Toronto. In 1948, she married Kosaburo Shimizu, a United Church minister, and continued to be an active community leader. In 1982, in recognition for ensuring the education of Japanese Canadians during internment, Hide received the Order of Canada.
The Toronto Japanese United Church was originally a Japanese-speaking congregation, worshiping first at the Church of All Nations on Queen Street. It was hoped that the English-speaking second-generation Nisei would join congregations in their neighborhoods. However, due to the war experience and the close-knit bonds made during the evacuation, and the desire of generations of families to worship together, most Niseis did not go to local churches. As a result, the Toronto Japanese United Church Nisei congregation was established in 1954 to provide English-speaking worship and fellowship. The two congregations required more space and accepted an invitation to share a building with Centennial United Church at 701 Dover Court in 1958. This necessitated the construction of an additional chapel designed by Raymond Moriyama. The decades that followed brought a number of amalgamations and relocations. In 1986, the Nisei congregation amalgamated with Centennial to form Centennial Japanese United Church. In 2006, 701 Dover Court was sold, and CJUC and the Japanese-speaking TJUC congregation both relocated to Lansing United Church as tenants. In 2011, CJUC and TJUC moved to Oriole York Mills United Church to worship together with OIM. Later in 2011, CJUC and TJUC amalgamated as CJUC. And finally, after worshiping together for 3 years, CJUC and OIM amalgamated in 2014 to form Bayview United Church. While Bayview has grown and evolved together, there remains a solid trunk of a congregation whose perspectives are rooted in the shared history and experiences of the evacuation and internment. We hope by sharing this history today that we have given you some context to understand that perspective. We will now pause for a moment of reflection.